Hello and welcome back to Lesson 11, Part 2 of the Gilded Age. So looking at the timeline, we covered indigenous cultures, pre-Columbian society, then European colonization, the conflicts within European colonization, including the conflict between England and the British colonies that led to the Revolutionary War, which then in turn created the United States. To grow and get economic power, they had to create new innovations, and they had the institution of slavery, which was obviously very controversial and against the Constitution, so it led to conflict that led to the Civil War. The Civil War, 600,000 deaths, really terrible, divided the North and the South, the Union and the Confederacy, but the Union maintained. Abraham Lincoln died, and it kind of left an unstable period for the United States of Reconstruction that ended up still getting a pretty strong divide between segregation in the South and more factory work in the North. Within those factories created the Gilded Age. That is an opportunity for some people to grow manufacturing things like steel and oil to make a colossal amount of money, but it came at the expense of those who are less fortunate, those who are in the mines and the factories who are working very hard in very tough conditions. Another part of the Gilded Age that we're going to touch on today is immigration. What are some of the positives and negatives of immigration? Specifically here in America. This is something that you can write down in your journal, you can talk with someone at home about, or just get those juices flowing of thinking about immigration and the role immigration has in America. So I thought this was a kind of a cool image of the Statue of Liberty as it appeared in the Gilded Age compared to what it looks like today. You know, the Statue of Liberty is holding up that lantern to say, this is the place of liberty. This is the place where you can come and live out your dreams and pursue happiness. And it really is a message for immigrants because we are all immigrants. If you are not Native American, you are an immigrant. You came here from somewhere else. And that is a key part of American history. I thought these were some cool images as well to kind of give scale. It's a copper statue, and at the base of it, it says the new Colossus. And within that, there's a section that says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." So come to America, and this is a place where you can thrive. During the Gilded Age between 1870 and 1920, about 20 million Europeans came to America. During that same time, hundreds of thousands more came from places like the Caribbean, Mexico, China. Now these people looked different, they sounded different, they ate different kinds of food, they had different languages. It was a real culture shock, and a lot of people who had been here for a couple of generations did not like all of this change. This led to a nativism movement, this idea of they're different than us because we had been here for a couple of generations, so they're different than us and they don't really belong, and people kind of banded together to say, ooh, I don't like the way that America is changing so quickly. But also what came with them is a willingness to work in situations that people who had been here for longer are unwilling to work. Think about it today. There are immigrants who are willing to work in hot kitchens or out in fields that people who were born in America are just not willing to do. Well, the same thing happened back then. These immigrants from different places came in and they were willing to work for cheaper wages. And if you owned a factory, you would pick up people who were willing to work for cheaper wages because it meant that you could make more profit. So a lot of the people who had been here working in these factories and then lost their job to these immigrants had a lot of bad feelings toward immigrants. And this still happens today. Immigrants are stealing our jobs. That's a same sentiment that came up back then. The immigrants came in and got processed to become Americans. They came in from Europe into the East Coast in New York City to a place called Ellis Island. Coming from Asia into the West Coast, they landed in a place in San Francisco called Angel Island. And when they came here, they wanted to maintain some level of their culture. I mean, I don't know what culture you are, but maybe you have traditional foods and styles and clothing and language and stuff like that that you try to maintain within your family. And you try to maintain that also in your community. So that's where things like Little Italy or Chinatown popped up, is people from Italy came here and then they said, let's all live in this one neighborhood so we could speak the language and sell our food and have our goods and all that kind of stuff that felt a little bit like home. Same thing with China. Chinatown, these started to pop up across big cities in America. If you look at your resources folder, there's a really cool short video on Ellis Island giving a whole bunch of stats and kind of cool graphics and stuff like that. Definitely worth checking out. But life was not easy for these new immigrants. And one group of immigrants got the short end of the stick more than all the others, and that were immigrants from China. The Chinese were willing to work the worst jobs for the lowest wages. So to people that own companies, that was really appealing. But there were so many people that were upset by the Chinese taking on these jobs and these positions that they pushed for a ban on Chinese immigration. In 1882, the Chinese were the first people to be banned from coming into this country. It was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty, come on over, everybody come on over. And that's like, well, no, not the Chinese. This wasn't even lifted until 1943. But it happened because the Chinese people were willing to do things that the people who were here were not, or even some European immigrants were not willing to do. They were living in really tough situations. They were working really terrible jobs. They built the railroad system, the transcontinental railroad. They built it by blowing rocks apart with dynamite, very dangerous jobs, but they were willing to do it because it was their way to come here and build the American dream for their children. But there was a lot of tension around the immigration issue during the Gilded Age. And guess what? There still is today. It's a huge issue. That was one of the biggest issues that was part of the Donald Trump campaign, was to build the wall and the issue of immigration. And if you compare kind of the critiques of immigration back then to the ones today, they're actually very similar. Things like they look and sound different, they speak different languages, they bring crime with them, they're not vetted enough. You know, maybe even stuff like they ruin America and what America used to be. Like these are things that are being said about immigrants today in the 21st century that were also used during the Gilded Age. But a lot of the Gilded Age centers around things happening in the cities. And a question for you is, what are the positives and negatives of living in a city? Maybe you live in a big city, maybe you live in the suburbs, maybe you live in the countryside. But what are the positives and negatives of living in a city? Just something to think about. There's good things and there's bad things. So you can pause the video and have that discussion, or just kind of think about this a little bit, because now we're going to talk about city life during the Gilded Age. During the Gilded Age, cities began to build vertically, going from bottom up. And this was possible because of things like cheap steel, remember the Bessemer process to burn out all those impurities, cheap labor from all the immigrants and people willing to do those kinds of jobs, leaving farm work from the South to try and do different kinds of jobs that were available for them. Also, a need to expand because so many people were coming in from other places that they needed to go somewhere, so they said, let's build vertically. And I think this image is kind of cool to show how New York City was built up in just a short amount of time. Here's a famous photograph of some of the workers who worked on these skyscrapers. This was just their daily life. To us, we look at this and we go, wow, that is insane. That's crazy. What happens if they fall off? My students have asked that. It's like, well, then they die. Like, oh my gosh, they did this every day. It's like, yeah, that was their job. But I want you to think about something. We look at these images and we go, that is crazy. I can't believe they did that. But what if you plucked one of these workers and you brought him into your life in the 2020s, and he just followed you around? Are there things that you do day to day that he would think you're crazy? That he would think that that's really dangerous? I mean, think about it like this. In 1890, cars were about 2 horsepower. They could go, 10 miles an hour. A really fast horse could go 35 miles an hour. But when you drive on the freeway, you might be going 70, 75 miles an hour. Imagine if one of these guys was sitting passenger seat in your car as you're going 75 miles an hour. Walking across the street when there's buses going by, flying by you at 40 miles an hour each direction, and a little signal goes and you just walk across the street and you assume that someone's gonna stop at the stoplight. One of these guys might be terrified to live your life. And we go, well, what happens if you step off the curb when a bus is going by? And you'd be like, well, then you die. Like, you're that close to death all the time? And what happens if you're driving? He's like, what happens if you're driving 70 miles an hour and you just go like this? It's like, you don't do this. And he would say the same thing. It was like, what happens if you slip off the beam? Well, don't slip off the beam. Life is dangerous, and you live a very dangerous life. It's just normal to you, and a lot of the stuff that they did back then, like up here and the skyscrapers, was just normal to them. So it's something for you to think about, that we're actually not that different. With this rapid growth of cities building up, problems started to exist. Okay, populations were going up and up and up because of immigration, because of people leaving the South, especially a lot of like freed slaves are like, hey, look, I'm out of here. The South is terrible. All this white supremacy and stuff. I'm moving up north to get factory jobs. But also in the South, things like better tractors and new technology in farming led to less farm labor being needed. So those people needed jobs, so they came up. So there was a great migration of people moving from the South to the north into factories, but also people coming from other places around the world into these cities. So the population started to grow, and with that, we started to get a very diverse population in the cities. Just like today, when you walk through a city, maybe New York City, for example, you're gonna sit on the subway, and on the subway is gonna be some millionaire hedge fund worker next to a school teacher, next to a homeless person. I mean, you interact with very wealthy people and very poor people. So I compiled a couple of pictures here. This is what a modern city looks like. Very rich people and very poor people kind of interacting together. And what you got in the cities during that time were these new immigrants, people coming up from the South, former farmers, and some of like the Rockefeller Carnegie types. They were all interacting within the city. But also just like today, the vast majority of people in the city do not have a lot of money. Most cities have a small group of very wealthy people and then a whole lot of people that are not very wealthy. The bad neighborhoods are bigger than the good neighborhoods, for example. Obviously, in poorer neighborhoods, people get desperate and they turn to crime. So that was happening during the Gilded Age as well. And people moved into these things called tenements. They were very, very small apartments that were like one apartment divided up into 3 apartments. And they became very crowded. Problems started to arise like sanitation issues. Because if you have a building that was designed to have 4 apartments and you turned it into 8 apartments full of people, the sewage pipes and stuff like that couldn't handle it. Plus that's 8 apartments worth of garbage and the garbage chutes couldn't handle it. So garbage started to pile up. Sewage started to back up. The cities became disgusting. Sanitation was a real problem during the Gilded Age in the cities, especially in the bad neighborhoods. A lot of people got very sick. People died just from sickness and illness. Garbage would be piled up 4 or 5 feet high in the middle of the summer of New York City. It was not good. But they were growing faster than the infrastructure could handle. And it was just kind of like life in the city at the time. I have a question for you. And you can pause it and talk about this or think about this. What are the positives and negatives of favors? How are favors both beneficial and dangerous? I'm sure you've done favors for people. I'm sure people have done favors for you. It's nice, you get something, but what's the downside? Well, now you owe them something, right? Well, this is just a part of life. And in the Gilded Age, favors became a mainstream part of life. And what this looked like was the rise of urban political machines. Political machines were organized groups of people that controlled the activities of city government. They would give voters things to get their votes in return. So people would come off the boat and people would be terrible to these immigrants. All the nativists like, get out of here, you're terrible. And they'd say, oh, here's a loaf of bread. Or do you need a warm bed for tonight? Come on, we'll help you out, we'll help you out. Wow, that's so nice. Yeah, all you gotta do is vote for my person for government. All you gotta do is vote for this person for mayor, vote for this person for Congress. That's it? Oh, okay, yeah. They're almost like buying votes because they were nice to these people that people were generally pretty mean towards. And with all that political power, then they use that power to manipulate and commit fraud, rig elections, get their friends in the powerful positions and stuff like that. So they kind of use these immigrants, gave them something very small to win their vote, because if you win over people in a democratic process, well, then you get political power. And these people got a whole lot of political power. And once you're in charge of politics and you're friends with all the people and these wealthy corporations and stuff, you really are unstoppable. And that is a lot of power in the hands of very few. One of the most famous is a man named William Boss Tweed, who ran Tammany Hall, which was a Democratic Party political machine of New York City. There's a great drunk history episode on this, which if you ever want to check that out, but he was basically a corrupt, rich politician that a cartoonist, a guy named Thomas Nast, who was a political cartoonist, said, I'm gonna take this guy down. And what he did was he started making cartoons to show Boss Tweed looking like a corrupt, terrible person. Because a lot of the immigrants at the time could not read. They were illiterate. So there might be newspaper articles about how Boss Tweed was corrupt, but they couldn't read it, so it didn't really matter, and they kept voting for him. So they made it into cartoons. Cartoons are very easy to consume. You see it, oh my gosh, this person's really corrupt. Okay, I'm out, this guy stinks. And that was a way to take down Boss Tweed. In your resource folder, I have a video that breaks down how Boss Tweed was corrupt, the way that he did it, and then how Thomas Nast took him down. You know, corruption works like that. It's kind of like if you have a friend that has a pizza restaurant and you have a big business and you have to cater it with pizza. You're not gonna call Domino's or pizza, you're gonna call your friend's restaurant, right? Well, that's what would happen is these political machines would put someone in power, and then once they were in power, they would give all the government contracts to their friends. And it was all just like cronyism. It was like hooking up their friends with a whole bunch of government contracts. And then if you're using government money, you're using taxpayer dollars, you go, how much is a pizza pie? You go, it's $10 for a pizza. I get $20, $50, you may get $100. Okay, whatever it is. Okay, it's just government money, it's tax money. I mean, do you know how much money of your tax money is spent by the government? We don't know. We don't get an itemized list of where all of our tax money goes. The Pentagon has failed like 6 audits in a row or something like that. Like there's no accountability when it comes to government and the money. So the same thing was happening back then, and they were getting away with it. And the way they took them down is with cartoons. Well, what would the modern day political cartoon be? I think for you and your generation, it would be memes. Memes are a way to get a story out there that is very difficult to get out. So I just picked an example. Jeffrey Epstein was a convicted sex offender, did some terrible things, and had a lot of very powerful connections. Okay, he was arrested, he committed suicide, or maybe he was killed. I don't know, there's some ambiguity around there. But essentially, there was a lot of mystery around what happened to Jeffrey Epstein, and some people wrote articles about it, but it didn't get a lot of attention. But then memes showed up, and those memes, and I show you a whole bunch here, these memes showed up that get people asking questions to their government, asking questions to journalists to do some more work to say, what's going on with Jeffrey Epstein? He had a lot of very powerful friends and connections, and then he mysteriously died before he could release who he brought to his island and had improper relationships with and things like that. But it was because of memes that we really became very aware of the story and history of Jeffrey Epstein. So there's a lot of connections between the past and the present. There was a lot of government corruption during the Gilded Age when people have tremendous power. You might remember in the last lesson how I talked about Jeff Bezos moved into a big house in Washington, D.C. I said that's so he could have connection. He's had proximity to all of the people in Washington, all the people in government. Well, that gives you a lot of power. If you have a lot of wealth, you want to have connections to politicians, the ones who make the laws and enforce the laws and everything like that. Well, it was a very formalized system in the Gilded Age. It was called the spoils system. What would happen is someone would go out and they'd campaign for you and they'd try and get you elected, and then if you got elected, you would give them a job. It was very direct. It was quid pro quo. It was, you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Whether or not they're qualified, I mean, the people that work for politicians, are they qualified or are they just friends? Sometimes it's just your friends. If I pick that pizza place, is it the best pizza place or is it just my friend's pizza place, you know? Sometimes you just hook up your friends just to get certain positions, and so you can help them out, help their business, and they help you with your campaign and all of that kind of stuff. It gets very murky, gets very corrupt. Well, the spoils system was a part of this, was a formalized part of this. And James Garfield was elected president. And part of the reason he was elected president was because of people going out there and campaigning and working for him. One of them was Charles Guiteau. Charles Guiteau went out, helped James Garfield become president, and then expected a job. And so he got him president. He says, hey, James Garfield, I got your presidency. Can I have my job now? And Garfield goes, no, I don't have a job for you. Sorry. It's like, well, we had an agreement. I did you a favor. Now you owe me. That's the agreement. And Garfield goes, sorry, I'm not going to do it. So Guiteau shot him, killed him. That put an end to the spoils system. But it shows how dangerous favors can be. You do a favor for someone very powerful, you expect something in return. But this goes back to the beginning of the country. Politics have always been corrupted by wealthy individuals and corporations because it's a way to gain power and manipulate laws and things like that. So there's a political cartoon here that shows how the robber barons of the Gilded Age had tremendous control over the United States Senate, state governments, local governments, mayors, all of that kind of stuff. It was a real problem of the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age had some beautiful things. We built these skyscrapers and a lot of wealth and advancement and stuff, but it came at a cost. The child labor, the terrible working conditions, the terrible living conditions, the sanitation problems, and then all of the government corruption. Something needed to be done to finally clean up all of this mess. And we're gonna get to that in the next lesson, lesson 12. See you then.